Yes, and I just put the Explore Canada info in the chat for you. Share the slides. Okay, so you should be able to see a slide. The business plan workshop today. It's, you know, this is one of those things where this is hard virtually, right? Because normally I see feedback with people's faces and get a sense of who's out there and what's going on, but I'm flying a little bit blind today. Business plan workshop. This is just a sort of a high level overview of what we would like to see in the business plan. And if you do go to the website, ProteusIC.com, competition outline, you'll see a description of the business, of what the content of the business plan is. It's only about 4 pages, and there's details about the length and the use of appendices. So visit the website for any detailed information, but at a very high level, we want a description of the market. You know, define the problem, the customer, size and scope of the problem, the technology. What technology are you working on? What does it do? How does it solve a problem? How does it make people's lives better? And then how does it get to market? So I'm going to give an overview of this, but the idea is really to focus on the goal of the competition. And that's creating viable commercialization strategies. So you want to keep in mind as you go through the business plan, as you go through the content, the reader and of course the listener in the pitch, you're very interested in what's the viable commercialization strategy for the technology. So give it your best shot. But I'm going to start with a story. I like the story. It'll demonstrate a number of principles by which we think about innovation and commercialization. If anyone remembers the Walkerton water crisis in the year 2000, you know, they got a toxic strain of E. coli in the town's water supply. And it led, unfortunately, to a number of people falling seriously ill. Some of them had kidney failure and some people died. There was a problem with the water treatment plant, which wasn't functioning properly. Now, E. coli 0157 is a particularly nasty strain. It produces a toxin that's toxic to humans. You are probably aware of it. You probably hear about food recalls every year. Lettuce recall due to E. coli 0157 or some other produce recall. It's naturally found in cattle. It doesn't cause a problem to the cattle. Cattle don't care, but it goes from the cattle into the soil and into the water reservoir. So it gets on the crops, gets into the water supplies. A brilliant scientist at UBC, Dr. Brett Finlay, who was studying how bacteria adhere to intestinal walls, came up with the idea that he knows the proteins involved, the bacterial proteins that are important for adherence to the cells of the intestinal wall. And he thought, well, if we make a vaccine out of those proteins and we inject the cattle, then they'll make antibodies, and that will prevent the bacteria from adhering to the inside of the intestines. That will prevent colonization of the cattle and prevent this strain of E. coli from getting from the cattle into the environment. So he did that. They created the vaccine in the lab, tested it, and showed that it worked. And they were able to license this to a company called BioNiche. BioNiche was a London company originally, but eventually moved off to Belleville, Ontario. So they created the IP at UBC and licensed it to a biotech company. The biotech company, of course, had to reproduce this and scale it and make sure that it works in real life, not just in the lab. And they did that. They made the vaccine, tested it in cattle, and found that it works. It reduces the E. coli L157 colonization in cattle. And so, you know, technology works, the research works, we got IP, scaled it up, it looked like it's working. So that's another risk that they checked off. So, but now, you know, so the idea is to go to market with a vaccine. And you can't just inject any old thing into an animal. It has to be manufactured according to good manufacturing practices or policies or laws in the US. And so they did that. They spent $25 million, built a GMP manufacturing plant for this vaccine, made the vaccine, and then tested it in, they needed regulatory approval. So they needed to test it in animals in the field for two things or three things. One is make sure it's safe, doesn't cause the animal any problem. Make sure it's effective. Vaccine works. It does what it's supposed to do. The animals make antibodies that prevents colonization. These animals are also part of the food supply. So it also had to be tested that it had no negative effects on the food supply. And that was found to be the case. It's a perfectly good vaccine, works very well. No negative effects on animal health, no safety issues in terms of the food supply, all good news. So they got approval, regulatory approval to market the product and start selling it. So they did that. Unfortunately, no one wanted to buy it. There were no significant sales of the vaccine. No one would pay for its use. The E. coli didn't cause a problem in the cattle. The farmers had no reason to buy it. It might help the environment. It did not increase the value of their cattle. It was only an expense with no benefit. So this really was an important lesson that even though the technology works, even though you have a really good plan to bring the technology to market, that you can execute on that plan and overcome manufacturing hurdles, regulatory hurdles, and other hurdles required to bring it to market, you still had a problem. The best technology, the best IP, the best development strategy, the best execution cannot overcome the absence of a paying customer. That's the lesson. And this is an important lesson because you really need a customer that cares about your product. Unfortunately, this is a common problem in technology commercialization. This is a real life example of something that we've known for quite a while. Commercialization is not simple. It's not just based on having a cool technology that works. Right? You can have the best new idea, and you can understand how it develops. But eventually, you are going to make a product or service that you provide to your customer. And it can't be a black box. You have to understand how this works. There are a number of risks. There's lots of different risks in bringing technology to market. So we'll just talk about three of them. The three main ones that they categorize. First is technology risk. You know, the technology has to work. I think for this program, we can assume the technology works, right? That's usually not the issue by the time it gets out of the university and into a scaled up situation. It's just to make sure that it works. It usually works, but it's a real risk. There's always technical hurdles. There's always regulatory or manufacturing hurdles that will need to be addressed. But it's a manageable risk. Most investors are willing to take a bet that technology risk can be managed. You can figure it out. There's execution risk. You know, do you have the right team to execute on the right business plan. This is also a manageable risk, right? Because you can add to your team. You can supplement it with experts who understand the field you're in and understand what needs to be done. You can change the team if required. So execution risk is a real risk, but you can manage it. It may take a little bit longer to get things done, but if it looks like things are going off the rails a little bit, investors will usually make the changes needed to get the right team together to see the project through to the end. The biggest risk is the market risk, and that's the cause of most commercialization failures. That's the cause of the example that I just provided with EcoNiche, right? There was no market for that product. So market risk is one of the biggest risks that we try to deal with up front. So the question is, how do you mitigate market risk? So we try to mitigate it through a really careful market assessment, through market research. But what does that mean? What do you do market research on? So I want to introduce a concept. The concept is called product market fit. If you're in the innovation space or the commercialization space or the entrepreneur space, you will have heard of this. But for those of you who are not, for those of you who are new to technology commercialization, because I'm just going to make the assumption that everyone's new to it, product market fit is the framework that we're going to use for our discussion. It's an important concept. It's the way most innovation commercialization courses are taught. It's the way most pitches are delivered, and it's a consideration by which most investments are made. So the purpose of the market research that you're going to be doing is to understand product market fit, to maximize product market fit, to make sure that there is a customer who cares for the technology that's being developed. So that's the goal. There's 4 elements. First element, of course, is the technology you're dealing with. What is it? What does it do? You know? Not only what does it do technically, but what problem does it solve? What's the unmet need in the marketplace that you're trying to address with the technology? Then who has that need? Who has the problem that you're trying to solve? That'll be your customer. You may have a wide number of choices in terms of customer, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but you really want to understand the market that you're going after, the number of customers or the type of customer who has the problem that the technology is addressing. And of course, you want to understand why your customer cares. The farmer did not care about EcoNiche. It offered no value to them. You want to understand what your customer is doing and how are they solving this problem that they have now? What's the current solution? And how is the new technology better than the current solution? And why does the customer care about that? We'll call that the value proposition. So why do they value the new technology over the current solutions? So together, these 4 elements are called product market fit. If you don't have product market fit, you end up like EcoNiche. No customers, no one cares about the product. So you really want to focus the research you're going to do to put together this business plan on maximizing product market fit, understanding what the technology does, what problem it solves, who has the problem, why they care about the new solution over the existing solutions. It's not a hard thing, but it's a super important thing. So let's look at it in just a little bit more detail. So describe problem or need in the market. What is the problem that's being addressed? How is it currently addressed? That's important. It's important for a number of reasons. Who is providing the current solutions and what do they provide? That gives you an idea of what's out there, so you know how your technology is different than the current solutions and why it's better. But you can get additional, really useful information out of that research. You can find out, well, how did they bring their solutions to market? Because if you're in the same space, you might be bringing your solution to market in a similar manner. So the market research can give you a lot of clues about how that happens. Are they profitable? It's an important consideration, right? All technologies are slightly different, but they all need to be profitable. So understanding how those companies are selling and marketing those solutions and how they are getting reimbursed for them is an important part of your market research. Why are the current solutions inadequate? And what needs to improve and by how much? There's usually some reason why the new solution is better. It's maybe better quality, maybe it's faster, maybe you can do 5 things at once instead of 1 at a time. Maybe it's more efficient in terms of costs. There's a lot of reasons why the new solution may be better than the old. You need to understand your technology. You need to understand what it does. How does it address the problem? And then how is it superior over the current solutions that you discovered in your market research? It's better, faster, cheaper, or something different. It's different than the current solutions in a way that's attractive to the customer. Does it fit into the customer's workflow? That can be a killer if it doesn't fit, or if the customer can't change what they're doing to adopt the new technology. So understanding the constraints on the customer is important. Talk a little bit about this more, but of course, is IP important? Assume it is important. All of these technologies have IP associated with them, and so we'll talk a bit about how that might be used in bringing a technology to market. What's your unique advantage? What do you have? Maybe you have IP that protects you from discourages copying. Maybe you have contractual relationships that discourages copying. It's important. It's good to understand how your IP fits into the problem-solving setting that you're addressing in the marketplace. So I'm just going to take a little break from product market fit. We'll finish it up. I want to give another example, just to impress this idea of product market fit is important, and it's important to everyone. It's not just new entrepreneurs who sometimes overlook product market fit, like in the case of EcoNiche. That was a small little biotech company. Even large corporations can make mistakes in how they bring things to market. So this example is Exubera. It's inhaled insulin, so injectionless insulin. This was approved by the regulators in January of 2006. This is a technology that was developed by Nektar Therapeutics and then licensed to Pfizer. The idea here was, inhalation devices are used for primarily small molecules. Most of the drugs that you take for asthma, things like that, they're small molecules, and they can be made in a form that's aerosolized and inhaled. But nobody had ever done that with a protein before. So they took this protein, insulin, it's a large peptide, and they figured out a way that it could be aerosolized and then delivered into the lungs, get into the bloodstream, and control blood sugar. And the technology works. It can do all of that. So instead of taking a needle, you can take a hit off this giant bong of insulin powder, get it into your lungs. It gets into your bloodstream, controls your blood sugar. So Pfizer predicted it would bring in $2 billion a year. Analysts thought, oh, everybody's going to do this. It'll be a $5 billion a year market. The problem, of course, is that injections they're really minor, they're very accurate, and they're quite discreet. Whereas there is nothing discreet about this device to inhale insulin. It'd be impossible to hide that. Also, injections are very accurate. This is not so accurate. It is hard to regulate the dosage in an inhalation device. And it's a lot of variability, a little bit of hit or miss in the way things are inhaled. It's also more expensive with no clinical benefit. In fact, maybe even a slight detriment. So the only real driver for the use of this device is that you really don't want to inject insulin. Yet injections are minor, they're accurate, they're discreet. You may not like them, but they work really well. So the actual worldwide sales was $4 million. So essentially no adoption. They halted the program and they wrote off the $2.8 billion they spent bringing this to market. So, they didn't have product market fit. If you ask people, do you like needles or injections? Of course, they will say no. But that's not the right question. The right question is, do you prefer taking your insulin through a minor, accurate, discrete injection device, or do you prefer taking your insulin through this large bomb of powdered insulin? It turned out they preferred the needles, whether they like needles or not. That was the preferable way to go. And just to emphasize that, that the product market fit is important, and it wasn't just the size of the device. A few years later, another company, Mankind, they repeated the entire process. They got the license of the technology from Pfizer, and all they did was they miniaturized this to a standard inhaler, a puffer. So they thought the new technology would make this more attractive. It did not. The fundamental misalignment of the product fitting into the marketplace was not solved by making the device smaller. Needles are still superior and they cost less. So that program was a failure. And these are professions. So that's how important product market fit. That's why we use it as a framework for discussing commercialization. It's not the only thing that matters, but it's something that you need to get right before you worry about the other things. Because without it, you don't have a market. So I'm just going to continue on a little bit with product market fit components. I want to describe the customer. Right? So you have the device, you have the problem in the market, and you have the group of people who have the problem, which is your customer. Who has the problem? Now, in the simplest sense, you have a single group of customers that you're going after. And they're the ones who buy the technology you're developing. So that's the simplest case. And if that's the case for your technology, that makes it very easy. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you may have a platform technology. That is, it could be some fundamental platform that's capable of making a whole variety of new things, each one being a new invention. Those can be very valuable. But the thing is, each new invention has its own group of customers. And you really have to pick the group of customers that you're going to go after first. In the real world, when you're trying to get investment to move your technology forward, basically get one shot at it. So you want to pick the customer group that is easiest to prove the concept that your technology works. it doesn't necessarily have to be the most profitable market or group of customers to go after. It has to be the one that says, it's going to be easiest with this group of customers to show this technology, this new technology works and is of value. It's not the biggest market, but it's the easiest path to market. And because if that works, you will get investment to look at other customers and to expand what you can do with it. If it fails, you probably won't attract any more money. So understanding that first group of customers you want to go after is important. Also, who decides whether the new technology will be used? In the medical industry, you often have a doctor who really wants to use the device. They may not get to decide whether they get to use it. Maybe it's a hospital that needs to decide if they'll purchase the device. Maybe it's an insurance company. They need to determine if they'll provide coverage for its use. There might be a lot of other factors involved. So understanding those factors, who's involved in that decision making and what motivates those decisions, it's an important consideration when you're thinking about the market for your product. And finally, how many customers do you have? What is your market? We usually want to know how many units of your technology could you sell per year? So how many customers do you have each year, potentially, you could sell to? That's called sort of customer-driven forecasting. So when you provide market numbers in your report, we're really interested in how many customers you have in that group of customers you're going to go after. We talk about the entire market, the other groups potentially, but we want to know how many customers you're actually going after. So the investment industry will use discounted cash flow models, industry comparables to similar technologies to calculate a valuation on the product or the company that's developing the product. To do that, you want to understand how many potential customers you have. So you have to dig in a little bit and figure out how many customers. So the total addressable patient population or the total addressable market for what you're doing if it's not a medical device. How many patients or how many customers could you sell to each year? Then how big is that market in dollar value? So I'll just give an example. It's going to be a medical example, but it really could be any example. So let's say we have a drug to treat ischemic stroke. So how many potential customers are there each year? Well, if I go to the American Heart Association and look at their statistics, I can find out that there are 795,000 strokes per year in the USA. Now, the thing about a drug or a medical device or maybe even some diagnostics, if it involves a regulatory approval, if it involves you having to test this in a specific patient population, you want to pick the patient population that will give you the best chance of success. But that's also the patient population that will be on the label that you're allowed to market your drug to if it is approved. So in this case, okay, this is a drug to treat ischemic stroke. We're going to test patients really who have had their first stroke, not patients who are having repeated strokes over and over, because we're really interested in whether the drug improves outcomes. So we want patients that have their first stroke. That's 76% of the stroke patients, 610,000 patients now. There's two types of strokes. There's strokes due to hemorrhage, there's strokes due to a blood clot or an ischemic stroke. So we're only going to treat ischemic strokes, not strokes due to hemorrhage. So that's 87% of the strokes. Now, broadly speaking, stroke patient may have a very, very mild stroke where there's very little tissue damage. We're going to exclude those patients because there's really no way to see whether a drug will have a positive effect because they've had so little damage. You can't measure an improvement on what is already a really good case. So we'll exclude very mild strokes. Likewise, we're going to exclude very severe strokes. Very severe strokes where there's a great deal of tissue damage means that there's probably a little chance that you're going to be able to see an improvement on those patient population. So we'll exclude that. So that leaves us with the mid-level, those with medium strokes. Well, those patients have to be diagnosed and categorized, which is only 87%. And they have to be medium strokes. That ends up 60%. So now we started with almost 800,000 stroke patients a year. We're now less than half of that. We're now down to 270,000 strokes. So that's what I mean about figuring out how many potential customers you have each year. Of course, everybody knows we're not going to sell to 100% of that, but they do a calculation in your head that says, well, a similar drug sells for about 15,000 per treatment. So let's say this is 15,000 per treatment. It will depend on how well it works. If it works better, maybe we could sell it for more. If it doesn't look quite as well, we could sell it for a little less. But let's say about 15,000 per treatment. So 15,000 per treatment, 270,000 possible patients each year. That's a $4 billion market per year, potentially. Now, we're not going to get all of it. But still, that's just the USA. And it's a $4 billion market. What does that mean? Well, if I'm an investor, and if the data looks really good, I'm really promising technology, I'm really hopeful that it'll be successful, it's probably worth putting in $50 million to test this idea and see if it works. For $50 million, I can access potentially a $4 billion market just in the US, let alone expanding that globally. So, these customer numbers become really important in calculating the total value and how much investment an investor may want to contribute to that and bringing it to market. So that's customers and customer numbers. Okay, value proposition. Really, the value proposition is what drives adoption of the new technology. You're asking a customer to change what they're doing now, whatever they're doing to solve the problem now, and to change and adopt something new. So that's actually a hard thing to do. And so the customer needs to be dissatisfied with what they're doing. And they really need to find the new option quite valuable in order for them to change. So value drives adoption. How the customer finds the new technology valuable. It's usually better, faster, cheaper in some way. There's something about it that's better. The question is, of course, how do you know? How do you know what the customer wants? So there's only one really, really good way of doing that. And that's to talk to your customers. If you're selling a vaccine to a farmer who doesn't need it, you probably should talk to a whole bunch of farmers and find out whether they'd be interested in the vaccine before you spend $25 million in building a manufacturing plant. So talk to the customer. If you get a chance, speak with the customer. Speak with a potential customer. But for sure, speak to the inventors of these technologies and dig into product market fit and how they're thinking about it. If you have an opportunity, if it's available, you can speak to the tech transfer office that has this technology. They probably have some ideas around that as well. So really dig in. You can find out some of this by doing your basic research, doing your basic library research. Everybody loves Google. You can find a tremendous amount of information. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But if you get out of the office and speak with customers, that's really going to be the most informative form of primary research that you can do. So let me just summarize. Market risk is the largest single risk that we worry about. Market risk is mitigated by market assessment, market research to ensure you have product market fit, to ensure there is a problem in the market, to ensure there's customers that care about the problem, and to ensure there's a value proposition that will drive your customer to adopt the new technology. It's really the foundation for business models. It's the foundation for your pitch. It's the foundation for go-to-market strategies in your sales and marketing programs. Just a very brief discussion of some tools, right? So primary publications, there's a perfectly good source. Go to PubMed or any other source of primary publications. Trade journals are often very good sources of information. You can find, in this case, we have incidence of disease because that's my focus, but trade journals will give you the incidence of the problem that you're trying to address. How often does it occur? Who has it? What's the impact of that problem? What's the economic impact of that problem? Because if you provide a solution, you can improve the economics of that problem. And that's an important consideration. There's general market research that's available to you. Through any of the university libraries, you likely have access to BCC research or an equivalent market research group that will provide general information, market research reports in your sector. That gives you good information. It's not so useful for maybe the top-down market analysis. The idea that the automotive industry is a $1.2 billion industry. That's not so important. We really want to know the customer numbers, but it does give you maybe the top 20 players, the top 20 potential partners that you might be interested in that sector. So the general market research reports can be quite useful for identifying the main players in a sector, if those are potential partners. Other areas are so this is medical, but any groups that monitor and collect statistics about the area of interest. So American Heart Association is all the cardiovascular statistics. CDC collects vital statistics. NCI collects oncology statistics. And then you can look at other economic areas will have their own groups that collect statistics. Any groups that do pharmacoeconomic analysis or equivalent economic analysis for a new product. You can find it in PubMed, but you can also look at the associations that do that. For medicine, it may be health technology assessment organizations like NICE or CADTH in Canada. Reimbursement. How are you going to be reimbursed? Well, look at your competitors. Try to understand how they are reimbursed. If you're selling to solve a same problem in a similar sector, you'll probably be reimbursed in a very similar way. So understanding how your competitors are reimbursed is a good way for you to get a feel how you would be reimbursed. So that's just the general ideas behind product market research. Okay. So you've done all your product market research. You've done your market assessment, and you have product market fit. And all the customers you've talked to, all the partners you've talked to, all the research you've done go, yep, this solves a problem. It's real. Customer cares about it. They really want the new product. We have product market fit. The product works. It solves a need in the market. We know who the first customer is. We've validated the value proposition with the customer. We know they want to change what they're doing. They want the new technology. We know that they're throwing money at us to get it. All right, now what do? What's next? We talk about product market fit and how important it is. And it is. But what comes next? What comes after you've figured out product market fit? So for this, it's going to be the commercialization pathway. How do you get from where it is now onto the market. So there's a few things to take into consideration. How are you going to develop technology? Does it need development? Is it ready to go? So if there are major milestones that need to be met to develop the technology until it's at a point for commercialization, it's important to understand that and to describe. What's the IP strategy? I'll talk about that in a minute. We'll have patents, and there's a general utility to IP, but you should understand, why do you have patents? What are you going to use them for? What's the regulatory strategy? Is there a regulatory hurdle? Depends on the technology. Depends if it's in the medical field or the diagnostic field or a similar field. But even food has regulations that govern its sale and distribution. So understand what regulations are involved for your sector. It might not even just be regulations. It might be standards that need to be met. Many of the fields in engineering require certain engineering standards to be met for that product to be sold commercially. So I'm going to feel for that. But certainly the experts who develop this technology, I think, might be a good resource for them. Who will market, distribute, sell, and maintain the technology? You going to do that? It's okay if you do. In fact, that would be fantastic. But there are other ways to do it. We'll talk about that in a bit. You can license it to a partner. And who would that be? Who are the potential partners? What's your revenue model? We just talked about that. How did your competitors get revenue? You can get an idea there. Do you need investors? And if so, who or what type? And when do they exit? What's their benefit to this? And something to keep in mind. I'll talk a bit about this a little further on. Is your technology enough of a market to support a business? Or is it maybe a little bit smaller? Perfectly good technology, great product market fit. Maybe it's more of a line item in somebody else's catalog. Then whose catalog is that? Who would you approach to see if there's interest in the product? It's an important consideration. So role of IP in the business, right? Not all businesses, but many businesses generate new IP. And then they develop or do technology. They develop the technology until it's at a point for commercialization. But there's also an IP associated with it. Could be patents, could be copyright, could be trade secrets. Maybe it requires development of the IP to a point where you use it in the commercialization to protect the market, or maybe you license it to someone else. So what is your IP strategy? It's good to define the business strategy first and understanding the role that IP plays. And for many businesses or for many startups, for many people developing new technologies, the main role of IP is to protect the business. It allows licensing of the technology to a partner. It also allows you to raise money from investors. It is the one tangible asset you have that's valuable that can attract financing to allow you to develop the technology. So what is the role of IP in business? If you have good IP and a good business model, you have a chance at investment. If you don't have IP, then it's a little more difficult to get investment to a new business model. They need some asset to invest in. So it's usually the combination. What is your technology development plan? You're here somewhere. You have a technology. It's the first steps of development have been done. IP has been filed. Where is it? And then where does it need to get to until you can launch it onto the market? Maybe it's ready to go now. Maybe it needs development before it gets there. And every sector has its own development pathway. therapeutic is different from a medical device, which is different from a diagnostic, which is different from a consumer product. Right? Consumer products, you can basically go at a very early stage, just go start selling it on the market. So understanding the pathway that your technology development program needs to undergo, just in broad strokes, how does it get to market? So you want to understand the general development pathway, and you want to understand any major hurdles and what plans you have to overcome. Do you have regulatory hurdles? Do you have IP hurdles? What hurdles are there, and what are your plans to mitigate them or overcome them? Regulations, as I said before, pretty much everything has some kind of regulation that governs its manufacture and sale. But many are not as complicated as medical therapeutics or devices or diagnostics, but maybe you have standards you have to meet. CSA standards or ASTM engineering standards need to be met. Understanding the basic regulations and standards that need to be met to get onto the market is an important concept. Okay, so I'm going to basically talk, I'm going to talk now to the 4 common pathways by which a technology gets to market. So you have a technology, you have some IP, you've got product market fit because you've done all your market research. You understand the basic steps of how to develop the technology. You understand maybe what the costs are and the major hurdles that you need to overcome. So now, how do you do it? What are the common ways in which it's done? So I'll talk about 4 of them. And you can figure out which one applies to your particular technology, or which one do you think would be the best way to go with it. So the first one is the simplest, right? You have an early idea, you have a patent, and you simply license that patent to a company that's capable of doing all the commercial development, selling it to the customer, collecting the revenue. And if you did your license right, they'll pay you a royalty. So this is the simplest pathway. But it's not amenable to all technologies. It's not amenable to all types of technology. It depends on the industry and the industry practices, and you'll figure that out when you do your market research. A lot of companies are not interested in licensing technologies early. Why do they want to take the risk? Maybe they want to wait for that technology to get onto the market for a little while, and then if it works, maybe then they'll acquire it. It depends on the sector you're in. If there's an opportunity to license directly, then the question is, well, who? That's where you want to identify all potential partners out there that would be interested in this technology and selling that to your target customer to solve their problems. So that's the simplest. Straight license. It's just not amenable to everything. Okay. Maybe the technology is a little bit early. Maybe it needs to undergo a little bit of development before anyone would be interested in licensing. Maybe it's not too much. Maybe maybe you could do this through a commercialization grant. Right? Maybe it works great in the lab, but maybe it's a process that you've started in the lab and now you need to scale it up a bit and show that it actually works at scale, or it's a medium scale, just to show scaling is possible before third party would be interested in taking on that risk of the new technology, and then doing the rest required for commercialization, maybe further scaling up and selling it to the customers and undergoing the commercialization process. Maybe that's the pathway. The pathway needs a little bit of extra development. That's a possibility. The question, though, is this just a small amount of development you can do in the university? Lead this program, get some commercialization grants, do this, or Does it require more than that? It requires a bit more funds than you can do just through a commercialization grants, through government grants. Maybe you need to maybe take this technology and put it into a company, attract financing into this company, because it takes a fair amount of work to develop the technology to a point that it's attractive to a third party. Maybe this is, if you're doing a drug, for example, you would have to develop the drug from its early stage, which is preclinical in a lab, very early stage. You'd have to deal with it, put it into a company, attract financing, figure out how to develop it, how to manufacture it, do all your preclinical and clinical testing till you get that proof of concept clinical study in a phase 2B study that allows you to say, yep, it looks like it's working, has efficacy, it seems to be safe, and it'll be attractive to a pharmaceutical company to then acquire the product then, or the company. And they can finish off the commercialization. Maybe it requires maybe it's a chemical process you need to scale up to a commercial scale before anyone would show interest. So there's a lot of reasons why why technology needs to be spun out into a company where you can attract the financing, do the development work before it attracts interest of a third party who'd be interested in commercializing. Finally, the fourth common way is to take it all the way yourself. And actually, I would hope that all of you are interested in this process. You have the early idea. You know there's product market fit. You've done your work. You know what it takes, what the major steps are to turn it into a commercial product. So you can attract the financing required to do that, execute on that business plan, develop the product, turn it into a commercial product, and then start selling it to the customer. And then the job is grow this business, grow the number of customers that you can service, grow this market. And then at some point in the future, if you're interested, if this looks like it's growing, you might take this business and sell it to a third party. But you don't have to. You can just maintain this business as a standalone business. And this is a way that we would love to see more of for bringing some of these early stage technologies to market. So those are the 4 common ways to bring a technology to market. It depends a bit on the technology and what's best appropriate for your technology. So you want to think about this, and in the business report that you'll be writing, in the business plan, you want to sort of lay out, this is the best way to get this technology to market. Right? So let me just review. You have a 4-page business plan and a small pitch that will be due. It's focused on product market fit and getting your product to market, creating viable commercialization strategies. You want to understand how the technology allows for a new product or service, it's the business, could be the technology, that's needed in the market, valued by its customer. You want to identify sustainable business model. You want to have product market fit. You want to know your numbers. You want to understand how many customers do you have? What does that market size look like? What's the potential revenue based on your competitive analysis you've done in your market research? And understand the commercialization pathway and how you go from where you are now to getting onto the market. Briefly summarize this in your business plan, your 4 to 5-page business plan, and then that's it. You got it. You are highly successful entrepreneurs in the making. Okay, so that's it. I'll stop the share, and we can talk about it. Take any high-level questions that I can answer, or Jordan can answer, and see what we got.
Hey, I just had an initial question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the great presentation. It's super helpful. I was just wondering, in our not abstracts, the business plan, how much right do we have to like sort of lay a claim on the revenues or the profits and say we can use them this way? Like, would any prospective revenues go to the university, or would they go to the innovators, the lead scientists on the project, or like how does that whole thing work? Because I don't want to like end up creating a plan.
So in that case, talk to the tech transfer office associated with the technology, and they can lay that out for you. I don't want to speak. I mean, there's 5 universities here. There might be slight differences between them, so I don't want to speak for it. But reach out to them. Reach out to the innovator and reach out to that office, and they will be happy to explain how that works.
Okay, thank you.
So that's basic tech transfer stuff. So every office is used to that, dealing with it. And speak to your innovators, right? You probably already have, but now that you are starting to write this, go back with some questions. Set up a Zoom call and have some questions.
Got it. Thank you. And just like a follow up on that, I was wondering, like, what amount of time do you think is respectful to like sort of request the scientists? Because obviously the more time the better, but I'm sure they're busy, so I don't want to like.
They're very busy, and do a short call with them. 30 to 60 minutes. I think most would be willing to do this with you. They put these technologies up there for this. So, but give them, be flexible. Just send a request out and say, if they have time and when.
Okay, thank you.
In the past, it's been pretty successful with getting people to chat.
I had a question about the market.
Yep.
So for my group, we were considering doing things in like lower middle income countries, but now looking at this presentation, I'm wondering if market data is a lot more to analyze in North American or like European context, because it's more readily available. So I'm just wondering how it works in areas of the world where data isn't available.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, right? So you might have to dig in a little bit to figure out where you can get the data. And it's going to depend on your sector a little bit. So, one way to do it is to sort of, well, what does it look like in North America or Europe? And then based on that, try to translate that to another population, if you can. It depends on the specifics, right? For medical stuff, people often look at the USA, and Europe's about the same. Canada's at 10%. So you get a good idea of what the potential market is. The details matter, but you'll probably be able to dig out publications that can help you with that.
There was a question in the chat from Sanaz about specifically about intellectual property. Sanaz, can you kind of clarify that question a bit to see what you were asking about intellectual property?
Hi, yes. Sorry, my English is a little poor. I've missed a section about IP. What's the abbreviation of?
Right. So IP just means intellectual property. And most, we like you to think about it in a broad sense, but really, for all these technologies, they are usually covered by a patent. And so are there any issues with patenting? And how would you use that? So there might be a small, it's not the most important section of the business plan, really, but if there are any issues with patenting, or if there are any opportunities with patent, it's more about the opportunities. Making sure you have a patent, because that allows potentially financing and licensing to occur. So just making sure that that exists. So, talk to the university that you're considering the technology for, and they can help you out with some of that information.
Thanks.
But if you look at the website, you look at the business plan, it is mostly about product market fit and pathway to commercialization. That means, if there's an opportunity there, opportunity for licensing and financing, it's important to know. If your model is to license, you got to make sure you got a patent there to license. So.
I have a question on collecting primary research, at least. Yep. So I know that at least for universities versus the private sector, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there when it comes to collecting primary information due to ethical standards. I know we're dealing with multiple universities here, but do you have any guidelines on if we want to go talk to customers, if we want to talk to relevant stakeholders in the industry to get some sort of background information, do we have to go through an ethical process to do so? Or are we free like a private company would be able to conduct this market research?
So, I don't have a general answer to that. I think it's going to depend a little bit on what the technology is. So for example, if you're dealing with patients, you probably can't talk to patients directly. So, in which case, but you can talk to patient organizations, organizations that deal with specific patient groups. Those are fine to deal with, and they actually know their patient populations really well. But if it's not medical, then I don't know if there is a hurdle to talking to potential customers at all. So that would be a question for the inventors, to run by them, see what they think. Like I said, I just can't, I can't, other than medical, I'm not sure if there's any issue at all with reaching out to potential customers and stakeholders.
Okay, thank you so much.
I would give you extra points if you reached out to customers and stakeholders. But I'm not marketing, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, so we get marks based on our initiative. So it's not just like what we put down on paper. It's just like, hey, I did this and I talked to this person. I did this research. So these activities, like they help.
No, it'll be based on what we read, on what's read by the reviewers. But if you did talk to, if you did some primary market research, then your what you write will reflect that.
Oh, okay, got it.
Check the website. If you have any questions, check the website. Because there's the outline of the business plan is there. And keep in mind the goal. The goal is what's a viable commercialization strategy. I've given a high-level general overview, but really, how does that apply to your particular technology? And Jordan just noted you can email the ProteusIC email address if you have some general questions. Is that it?
I did have just the last question of format. Do you want us to fulfill those requirements fully? Or could we, do we have leeway in terms of length if we feel, more or less towards our
I think the length is stated as to how long they want it. So I think they even talk about appendices. So some things that are maybe additional info would fit into appendices, but there are limits to the appendices. So look at the website and see what it says.
Yeah, basically like 4 pages and you're allowed 5 additional appendices to the plan. you want to keep it as brief and simple as possible. We do get a significant number of submissions, and so our judges kind of want, the basic 4-page plan with the appendices and that kind of thing. So keep it, simple and straightforward.
Got it. Thank you.
So don't forget, you'll be pitching this in a very short pitch as well. So you need to be able to say it in a short amount of space and time.
And one last question is, will this recording be available on YouTube or the website afterwards? Yes. So we've been recording it, and we'll be sending out a link to the YouTube video early next week.
I have a question.
Okay.
So my
Andreas?
my group is working with a technology that has multiple potential applications with different potential customers and regulatory hurdles. Should we focus like on just one or maybe two applications?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really good question. You want to talk about what the full potential is, but then you want to describe which one are you going after first and why. Does that make sense? So you can do both, right? You can speak in general how this has multiple applications. So the potential market could be quite large, but this is the one we're going to go after first to prove that it works, and this is why.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
If we have a hard time choosing between like two different sort of variations of either customer or business plan, like, do we just have to choose one?
As opposed to what?
Meaning, like, you could sort of give like a different possibility. For instance, like if you have a customer segment that could do with leasing or wholesaling, and then there's one that's just retail or something. Like, just a quick example.
So I mean, it's got to make sense to the reader, right? So as to what the rationale is for why you're doing it. As I said, you can always say multiple customer segments are available, and here's and give a brief description of what they are. But then say which one you're going after first and why.
Okay, so
it may make sense to do one first and then follow up with the others. Yeah.
Okay. So if I see like possible more than one revenue stream, I could mention those, give a little intro.
Absolutely.
Then just you have to focus on one and leave it out from front to end instead of doing like 4, right?
Well, as to why that one. Right. So a reader would want to know that there's multiple potential revenue streams. That's important to know. But they also want to know why. Well, which one are you picking and why? Are you picking that one to go with first?
Okay, cool. And in regards to like the pitch process, I'm just wondering, like, in terms of presentation skills and all that stuff, how much does that go into the mark, or
It does go into the mark. Yeah, for sure. Just it's a portion of the mark.
Okay.
So we want to see product market fit. We want to see path to market, and then there's a little box for presentation skills.
Okay, so those are the 3 major categories. Okay.
I was also wondering if we can change our target market from what we originally proposed on the abstract. Like, do we have to do what we said?
Absolutely. If you come up with a better idea, go ahead. So yes, you can change from what was on the abstract.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, like, you don't have to follow, the abstract does not have any bearing on the business plan or pitch in terms of content. So we're not going to go back in time and look at the abstract, then look at the business plan to make sure that you've kind of followed through with that. So you do have the ability to kind of change if you find new information going forward. Yeah.
Hi, I just had a question regarding the cost of the technology. So if we have an idea of what material we want to use and what company we want to manufacture this technology at, do you want us to like be very specific about the cost and go ahead and get it quoted? Or is it just like a general idea of,
A general idea,
okay,
but if you want to get it quoted, that's fine.
okay, thank you.
You know, the more, so just think about it, you know, in your pitch, they're going to ask questions. And they'll be, you know, pretty general questions, but they might dig into something like, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? You know, how do you know how much it costs? And if you have the answer in your back pocket, it's great. But it's not, I mean, that's pretty specific. That's not something that generally comes up. Okay, it's great. We still have 31 participants. It's great to see. Thank you, everyone, for sticking that out. So don't forget, if you have any further questions, you can email to the Proteus website. Proteus email. Reach out to your inventors and reach out to the office with the technology if you need more details about the technology, for sure do that.
Okay, it looks like people are starting to sign off. So if we want to wrap up, we can.
I think that's good.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing your business plans. Just remember that the due date for the business plan is February 22nd. And to submit to your business plan, you can just go to the ProteusIC.com website, and there's a form similar to what you filled out for the abstract, and you can upload your business plan as a PDF and submit it. So we look forward to reading your plans.
Thanks so much, Jordan.
Okay, Colin, I'm going to end the Zoom call now.
Thank you.